This is Polly, and welcome to our podcast As Far As I'm Concerned. We're a relatively chill podcast that gives often overlooked students and teachers a platform on which to express their opinions on social issues through a casual format they're comfortable with. Just a bit of background information that we probably should not be telling random strangers on the internet, but that is necessary for sufficient context. We are all private high school students. This is not affiliated with our school in any way and should not be treated as such. So for today's discussion, we have TV. Let's get started. So to begin our segment about TV shows and movies, on average, how much do you say you watch TV every week, either in terms of time or in terms of how many episodes or seasons?
I don't watch TV too much because I have a lot of other commitments, but on average, I watch maybe 1 to 2 hours of TV every week. Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty good rough estimate.
So I barely watch any TV at all when I'm by myself. The only TV I watch is binging Netflix with my friends, but I haven't done that in a long time.
All right. I guess I watch, 2 episodes per day, probably on average. So that's 40 minutes per day. So 40 times 7, it's 3 hours.
But I'm not locked into watching whatever my 3-year-old son watches, Octonauts and Bluey, which I'm not really going to count because that would be an embarrassing amount of hours. Probably 10 hours a week, an hour and a half a day or so.
We have a very wide range of times. But yeah. So our next question is, what are some of your favorite shows or movies, and why do you like them?
Well, for me, after 10 recommendations, I got really into Avatar The Last Airbender, and its sequel, Legend of Korra, so I really like those. I also I don't really watch a specific set of shows. I watch random shows. I watch Suits, but I also watch stuff like the Boss Baby series. So, yes, I watch it. And I'm proud of it. I'm admitting this on a podcast.
You know what?
Me, I'm braver than you.
More power to you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So
I watch a lot of things. What?
I didn't know there was a Boss Baby series.
Yeah, it's on Netflix. It's actually more entertaining than the movies.
I'll take your word for it.
I'm intrigued.
Yeah, so...
Right. To get back on topic, I was one of the people who gave Mila the recommendation for Avatar The Last Airbender. I haven't seen Legend of Korra, though. But I've heard some people complain that it's not very consistent. I won't get into that, though, so that we don't start another fandom war. And I think the last Netflix thing I binged with my friends was this horror series called The Girl from Nowhere, and I don't think you guys have heard of it, but yeah.
Okay, so asking me my favorite shows is a very loaded question. I think for Western TV it's easy because The Good Place is a masterpiece and I refuse to hear otherwise. Let's see, what else? Recently I watched Bunny Girl Senpai, and that show had way more emotional impact on me than any show should have. So I think I have to list that. What else? The Promised Neverland? That was good. Who's left?
I made a long list of shows that I've watched previously, and shows that, I don't know. I don't think any of these are currently airing, but there's still things that I do watch. Arrested Development, Avatar The Last Airbender. Saturday Night Live I do watch every week still. There's a series called Spartacus Blood and Sand that was on Showtime or Stars. The Simpsons, 24, The Office, The Americans. There's this Korean zombie show on Netflix called Kingdom, which I really loved recently. The West Wing, Sopranos, and then Dragon Ball Z, Death Note, and the first Full Metal Alchemist are some of my favorites.
I don't think I've ever had a group with more polar opposite preferences. This will make this very hard to talk about.
We all like Avatar The Last Airbender. Right?
I have not watched it. I do want to talk about late night. I do want to talk about late night, though, because I think late night is just a bad format. I don't think I've ever watched a late night show that I have enjoyed.
Do you mean those late night talk shows?
Anything. Saturday Night Live. Conan was the only exception where I thought it was kind of fun. but like Seth Rogen, Trevor Noah, they all suck. I think late night just sucks.
Define late night. Like, after what time is late night?
No, like late night talk shows. That's what I mean. That format.
Oh, so it's like defined as that. Okay.
Po' boy, we're gonna have a long conversation about Saturday Night Live another time, and I'm gonna make you into a convert of that show.
Our podcast is
of experimental comedy on TV, and some sketches work, and other ones don't work, and it's fresh every week with different guests, musical and host. And I'm gonna make you like this show.
I'm gonna be spending a lot of time with you this year in various ventures, so I'm sure something's gonna change.
Our podcast is being usurped, guys. They're literally taking over.
We need to fill an hour with these questions, and you got the two dumbest people to interview.
You're not wrong there.
Holy moly, ouch.
Wow.
Hey, don't say that. You have
Or
to
you got
respect
at
your
least
teachers.
me. You got the dumbest person to interview about gender, race, and sexuality. We need to
You
fill the
said it,
time
not
stuff
me.
out.
All right, well, I think we kind of covered genres pretty much in terms of what we watch. So now let's talk about, how do you think diversity is portrayed within? It's kind of like a big change to a more serious note, but yeah. So how do you
Now,
think?
serious is one thing
portrayed?
these two don't do well. I don't think any of us do, honestly. Well, I'm gonna talk, and then you can talk. Okay. Well, in what I watch, I don't watch much. Like, I don't honestly watch a lot of TV shows. I just generally sometimes rewatch things that I already have watched, and my Netflix account is on kids, so I can't really watch much. But in the stuff that I have watched, there's not too much diversity, honestly. I don't know. There's a lot of kids shows in that mix. A few not kids shows too, but I haven't really seen much diversity. And I think TV shows is one of the main places where that still needs to change a little bit. A lot of it is virtue signaling, in my opinion, like putting in diversity in the cast. And sometimes it's necessary, but in a lot of places it's just not there. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I also think ATLA, Avatar The Last Airbender, does a pretty good job of diversity, but I also feel like other shows should try to follow this example, particularly kids shows, because it will leave a more lasting impression on the kids.
I feel like I should mention that we're not talking about the movie here. We're never talking about the movie, just to be clear.
The
We don't
Avatar
mention the
doesn't
movie.
exist.
Exactly.
There is no war in Ba Sing Se.
There is no movie in
The
the
world.
Atla universe. Okay, moving on. Oh, boy, do you want to share?
I have to talk now. Okay. My main thought for diversity is Raj from The Big Bang Theory, which I think I think The Big Bang Theory is just a terrible reference point for anything. But, I mean, so here's the thing, right? When you talk about diversity, if you even say that any show needs it, it immediately becomes virtue signaling, right? I think this whole idea of virtue signaling is just, like, false. Because obviously there are times when it is truly virtue signaling, but criticizing something because it is, I don't think is necessarily valid. Because that's what society does, right? We are trying to get people to be more virtuous. Is that not virtue signaling? Just by definition?
I mean, virtue signaling is viewed as a hollow gesture.
Yeah, virtue signaling is just like pretending that you're leaning towards virtue just for like the support of an audience or like just to get more viewership.
One good example of this, Po' boy, is a corporation turning their Facebook profile picture into a big rainbow for Pride Month, but then also sending lots of donations to PACs that support congressmen who dislike gay rights and gay marriage.
Yeah.
Why did
Okay,
this
I
turn
wanna
into an
add to-
AP government lesson?
But I want to add to Po' boy's thing about Big Bang Theory. I also wrote down some notes about that. On one hand, there's a show on Netflix called Master of None, made by the stand-up comedian Aziz Ansari, who's
Yes.
South Asian. And I think it does a decent job of showcasing issues that people like him face in dating and in life, and the sort of problems that might arise from the tradition in the family that he comes from, but the sort of modern dating scene that he's entered into. And then there's things like the Big Bang Theory, where Raj is like some big pampered rich Indian who can't speak to women, right?
Yeah.
And going even further, Howard Wolowitz is like a neurotic Jew with a heart condition. Like, that show has just stereotypes everywhere, and they're not positive and they're not helpful. There's a new show on Netflix called Q-Force. Have you guys watched Q-Force yet?
I've heard about
Not
it.
yet.
Is it worth watching?
I'm an ally. I'm not a member of the LGBTQ plus community, but I found that show embarrassing for them. It was so... It just like put every sort of flamboyant stereotype about being a part of the queer community on blast, and it not in a positive way.
Yeah. So I want to circle back to the Big Bang Theory, because I was having a conversation with my friend about this. He genuinely likes the message it presents because he reads it as a sort of satire in the harmful parts of nerd culture. And I find that very interesting because to me it just seems tone deaf, but there is a sect of people who see it as a satire, as a calling out of nerd culture.
I guess it's a calling out of nerd culture if you ignore the context of his character, right? That he is a massive disappointment to his family because he's not making a ton of money. Like, he's not a doctor or a lawyer. And they compare him to his very rich, successful sister quite often. And he obviously comes from a very wealthy family back in India that yells at him for not being married. And I'm not South Asian, so I can't necessarily speak to it. So I'm going to shut my mouth.
Yes. All right. With all the South Asians in this call, I think we have a very terrible representation of anything to talk about. Right?
There is one show that I would like to bring up. If any of you guys have seen or heard of Glee, that show.
Yes.
I've definitely heard of it.
Personally think that they are like, it's the most representative like Western TV show I've ever watched. And the thing I like about that is that they have Asian characters, they have LGBTQ characters, they have so many different races there, and they don't necessarily conform to it because they don't just have one character from each of these, so you can kind of see the variety. Like, for example, they have two characters who are gay, and you know how there's kind of like that stereotypical loves Broadway, very like girly kind of stereotype, but one of them does fit into that stereotype, whereas the other one doesn't fit into that at all. And they have more gay characters who are like on the football team, who are these super manly guys, and I appreciate that because it shows like a variety of people in that show.
I can kind of see what you're getting at, right? Like stereotypes to some extent, they are grounded in reality, but they've gone so far from reality that they're not really true. So like showing one kind of fits a stereotype and one who doesn't is probably a good route to go.
I haven't watched Glee, but from what you've described, I can play devil's advocate and say that character is not canonically gay, and he's just gay in name to inflate the show's diversity.
That's happened before in the show too, I believe. God, I feel old because you're asking if I like seen Glee, but that show came out when I was growing up. There's a character who is a wheelchair user, I think, and he sings the song "Safety Dance," by the way. And the actor in real life is not a wheelchair user. They hired an actor to basically sit in a wheelchair instead of actually hiring someone diverse, someone who is physically disabled. Just one example.
Yeah, I do know Glee definitely does have some issues, but I feel like in terms of like displaying all races, it's better. Also considering it's like located in Ohio.
I guess that's a step in the right direction, even if it's not perfect.
It's still something, you know?
No, I agree with you. Yeah, Glee is definitely a very diverse show, for sure.
Yeah, and it avoids the thing that's very common in virtue signaling, where there's just that one token character that doesn't really have a personality and is just there.
Yeah.
So back on topic, we've talked about kind of TV shows depicting real life representative, if they're representative or not. Do you believe that kids shows should be more representative? For example, like Avatar: The Last Airbender. It is quite representative, especially of kind of like the minority Asians, but do you think it should be even more representative?
Yes. That's all we need to say. Yes.
I mean, yes. Like, if you teach and if kids shows address this more, it wouldn't be hard because kids shows address a lot of other things. Like, I've seen ones that like address gender conflicts. I can't quite remember what, but I'm sure they do address them, right? And if we started doing that, if kids shows started addressing like even more issues, like maybe even like socioeconomic barriers and stuff like that, which they do address to some extent, but if they did it more, kids would understand more.
I'd like to offer a different perspective on this. I watch a lot of like infant and toddler television compared to just kids TV. And there's a show on Disney Plus called Bluey. Have you guys seen Bluey before?
No.
Yeah, it's new. I don't
it's
think.
about a dog family in Australia. I think it's put on by BBC Australia. But every episode is about a different type of play for toddlers, like with a bike or playing horsey or doing imagination and all that stuff. And what I like most about it is like the mom and dad are present in the show and they make me laugh every time because I really relate to how they react to some of these situations. But one thing that I think makes this show different from all the other shows, I had no idea that Bluey and her sister were girl dogs for the longest time. It came up once at some point way later in the first season, and they used like her or something, and I had no clue that Bluey was a girl dog because it wasn't important to any of the stories that they were playing. Contrast that, for example, with Paw Patrol, where there's like one of the main dogs is like a dog that wears pink. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I see what you
get
mean.
you.
But the issue is we're not there yet. We haven't completely we haven't made enough progress to honestly just ignore gender roles. So I think it would be better to like point them out now until they kind of understand that there's no point in like gender roles and they're kind of arbitrary, and then we can start moving towards just not mentioning them at all because they're irrelevant. But we're just not there yet.
Mm-hmm. And on the topic of main characters and shows, do you believe that like their position is realistic? This doesn't like apply to shows such as Avatar, where the point is it's unrealistic. But in terms of like Big Bang Theory, or even Glee, or like The Office, do you think that they're realistic?
So like the character portrayal, if they're like realistic, I think that shows are working towards doing a better job at that. And I think there is like no one is like super overpowered and perfect and stuff. They're trying to work away from that and portraying them as flaws. I do think that they're not realistic because TV is an escape. I'd say 50-50, somewhat realistic, somewhat not realistic.
This is such a broad question. We need to limit the genre. If we're talking about sitcoms, like, the point is to be kind of played up, right? None of the characters in The Office would exist in real life, right? Mm-hmm. You can have those sort of character traits, but they're played up so much for comedy, right?
Yeah, like the point of a lot of shows is not for realism necessarily, it's just entertainment. So even if they're not realistic, they're designed that way. Like obviously they can't be perfect at everything or like a self-insert, but if they're just highlighting flaws or certain traits for comedy purposes, that's definitely okay, and that is a genre of its own.
I have is so I don't know any mobsters, gladiators, or element benders in real life. So to say whether something's realistic or believable seems a tad difficult.
I think we're focusing like in terms of their character,
right?
Like,
so
instead
there's
of
a
like
show that I used to watch growing up called 24, and it's basically about a vigilante, Jack Bauer, working for the counterterrorism unit, stopping terrorist attacks. And I'd say many of the seasons were about stopping some Middle Easterner from blowing up a bomb or a plane or something like that. And the show used to bend over backwards to not only show us that these Middle Easterners are terrorists, but then they would also have good Middle Eastern people of Middle Eastern descent in the show, reminding the audience that not all terrorists are Middle Easterners. And they sort of tried to have their cake and eat it too, and it didn't work. It worked in the sort of age of the paranoia of terrorism of the 2000s. But when I look back at it now, I find it very unbelievable.
Yeah. And kind of on a similar topic, would you prefer, like we talked about shows kind of making it slightly unrealistic to make it more entertaining, would you prefer that shows were more realistic, or would you prefer them to be unrealistic but entertaining?
It really depends on the kind of show. I'm not watching like a specific like comedy show to learn about real issues. Although if they're in there and they're done well, that's good. But it really depends on the kind of shows.
Well, I think being played up and not addressing real issues are not mutually exclusive. In fact, I think it's probably better if something is hyper exaggerated for the sake of comedy while portraying a real issue. I think this is what good stand-up comedians do all the time, right? I know this is moving a bit away from TV, but people like Bo Burnham, like their whole thing is that overplay something to a large extent with big theatrical everything and portray an issue so that society cares and is also laughing and everyone cares and everyone's laughing and it's great.
That's similar to satire too.
Realism matters in a lot of shows, and then realism doesn't work in many others. Like, I'll give you the sort of mundane examples. Like, if a hospital show like ER or Grey's Anatomy or any of the other hospital shows were realistic, then most of the patients that doctors would treat would have heart disease or high cholesterol. They wouldn't have some rare tropical Amazonian disease that requires a team of hundreds to figure out, right? Or like if we had a police show, and there are thousands, it seems, of like police procedurals every week, like we watch them do paperwork most of the time, or fail to solve a crime because murders are really hard to solve. People aren't going to easily just admit to doing a crime in the interrogation room like these shows, portray. They're going to keep their mouths shut, call their lawyer, and hopefully not even go to trial. Or they get plea deals. These are the things they have to make unrealistic to make them entertaining. Because a cop's life or a doctor's life isn't going to be the most glamorous.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think since there's so many different genres of shows, and people kind of tend to like gravitate towards shows that more align with their interests. Like some people might like comedy more, some people might want to watch more anime. And
that's not a rip at anyone, I promise you.
Yeah, it's not.
I'm sure.
And do you think that this can kind of cause rifts between different types of fandoms? Like people might think that the genre that they like is a lot better than another genre. Or it might discourage someone from watching things out of a different genre because they think they won't like it.
I'm sure it does, especially in our age group specifically. With the amount
much about our ages.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry. I don't know a ton of genre fighting. I do know, like, for example, that probably anime does separate itself among the genres. And it's because most anime is bad. Most of it is bad. There are gems every year in anime that are well written, beautifully animated, well voice acted, but they're sitting in a sea of hundreds of just god-awful titles. And unfortunately, those god-awful titles, because there's so many of them, seem to overpower people's sense of what true and good anime would look like.
So then, okay, so I'll address this in a few ways. One thing I'll say is that I think in Western media it's worse, and that the shows that are well written seem to come up never or very rarely. And I think the shows that are bad in Western media are significantly less tolerable than bad anime. That's my thing. I think bad anime are just more fun.
I don't agree with you, but I hear you. When I was in high school, the people who shopped for anime at the video stores were weird people. Like, they wore these big, like, kill you with their steel-toe boots, long black trench coats, a fedora hat. They made me, like, feel bad about liking anime and being a normal person with friends. Now, I think anime is much, much more mainstream and less embarrassing to admit, I think. But that could just be part of growing up. I just don't care about what other people think if I like something. You guys are in the midst of all that, teenage angst and hormones, and that's still something you deal with.
I also think that, like, not like other peopleism is getting bigger, and like people are more eager, like in a good way. People are more eager to admit like what they like, and other closeted anime likers are coming out and, forming communities around that.
Yeah, and kind of going back to, wait, do you think that shows kind of glorify violence a little bit? Like, there are so many animes that are like kind of violent, like if you look at just like Demon Slayer or like Attack on Titans.
Okay.
Even though it's like animated, right, it still depicts violence. And do you think that this, like, obviously it's for entertainment, it's the genre, but is it a good thing? Or is it a bad thing?
I'm going to rant about this for a few hours now, but I'm not going to talk about anime because I don't really watch anime, but I'm going to talk about Indian movies and like Bollywood and all of that. So I'm not going to go into too many details, but the entire plot of basically every Indian movie I've ever watched is literally just violence for an hour, then a little bit of a love scene, then violence for another 1.5 hours. It's like the protagonists are chosen because they look like they could beat people up, and they do beat people up. They beat basically everyone up. And in the end, do they win by their logic? Do they win by their skills? Like 1 in 100 times. The rest of the 99 times is because they beat the villain up, and the villain runs away crying. And I really, really don't like it because honestly, at this point, most of the movies don't even have a plot. It's rare to find one that like actually has a good plot that we can actually follow and be invested in the ending. But most of the time, people just go because they like the heroes or like enjoy watching people beat each other up. And I really, really, really don't like that. It's one of my biggest pet peeves of movies, and that's why I try not to watch Indian movies when I can.
Do you think
sometimes it works well? Like in a movie Bahubali, it worked really well, and then sometimes it does not.
Do you think, like, people who want to watch violence and they watch this, do you think it can encourage, like, violence in real life?
To some extent. Like, you gotta separate movies from real life, and that's hard for, like, people our age to do, mainly. But, I mean, I think once you get older, it's easier to separate that.
I will die on this hill as someone who loves first-person shooters, that watching violence when you're not very, very young, as in, I think over the age of 7, I think watching mild violence to some extent cannot be doing that much to you. I'm not talking about mild violence. Mild violence is fine. I think almost every movie has it. Like Star Wars, like they're shooting stuff up with beams. That's not bad. But
I feel certain that there's scientifically no link between the violence of TV shows and video games and violence out in the real world.
That's exactly what I'm saying. The scientific consensus supports me here is that there's nothing.
Yeah, that doesn't mean it's not harmful in other ways. I just don't think that people are watching a violent movie and then going out and committing violence.
It could just be correlation.
Well, it just doesn't happen. But like you can pick up, like if you think that there's a character who treats women terribly and you admire that about him, it could influence the way that you interact with others. But I don't think it's causing violence out on the streets.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But like in particular, people who idolize characters that are meant to be like not good people, like I guess the Joker comes to mind. People who idolize people like characters like the Joker, that could actually be a problem, not in that they would actually commit violence, but as Mr. Sam said, more about them adopting like toxic character traits.
Yeah, that plays out a lot, not only in real life, but dangerously online.
100%.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
In addition to maybe like behaviors that shows can create, what are some standards that you think shows might create, such as like beauty standards or cultural action standards?
I mean, yeah, there's obviously the beauty standards. Like, why is it always that the female superheroes are always dressed in like those uniforms? Like, why? I don't understand it. And there's also like cultural standards, like things that you like in the Big Bang Theory. I mean, that's more of like a negative stereotype, but there are certain things that every character of like a certain culture are expected to do, and if they don't do that, it's just seen as really, really strange and weird. And I mean, that's all I can think of right now, but there are like tons of standards like that. Like everything affects something else. I don't know if you guys.
I try to think of examples that were relevant to kids your age. And the one that I kind of came up with was the idea that a lot of the shows that teenagers are watching, like, say, Riverdale or Friday Night Lights, are just examples of this. But a lot of these teenager shows about teenagers hire actors in their late 20s or maybe early 20s. And these are not, they have impossible beauty standards that a normal high schooler just is not going to achieve, right? They're hiring people that are far older and, like you said, impossibly beautiful, impossibly fit. And these are not what high schoolers look like. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like a ton of shows I've seen that have like high schoolers or even middle schoolers sometimes. They portray things in like unrealistic lights. And speaking of that, honestly, just middle schools and high schools in general are portrayed horribly. Like, no one acts like that. I mean, of course, we go to a private school, so that's different, but no one acts like that in any normal high school either. Like, I've talked to people and they're who go to normal public schools, and their high schools don't act like that. So I don't know why. Like, I don't know if that's like part of the escape or the allure of those kind of like shows, or why they're portrayed that way, but it's why are they done that way? Couldn't they be shown like more realistically? I can't think of anyone who's been to a high school like those. Ones with like people always partying and like, you know, getting together with boyfriends and girlfriends.
I think we're just nerds.
No, it's not. It's not that. I talked to like public school kids too, like not nerd.
Let me give you just an example on opposite ends here. On the good end is the movie 8th Grade that came out a few years ago. I thought the sort of awkward teenage experience was quite authentic in that movie. On the other hand, there's a movie coming out based on a Broadway show called Dear Evan Hansen, and Ben Platt is playing the lead, and he goes to high school. And Ben Platt is like 28 years old, and it's embarrassing to watch him walk around this high school, and because he looks way older than everybody else around him, and it's a little embarrassing.
This is what a lot of like Vine or like former Viners, I guess Vine doesn't exist anymore, but like Instagram stars will do, where it's this weird sort of thing where they're well into their 20s, but they act very relatable to high schoolers and middle schoolers and earlier. That always put a bad taste in my mouth. I don't know if y'all have had experience with that, but people like Lele Pons and Brent Rivera, they'll be talking about annoying things parents do at the ripe old age of 26 years old. It's like, ouch.
Oh man, yeah. I don't know why, but this conversation is kind of reminding me of like High School Musical, which I literally couldn't sit through. I had to stop watching it. My sister watched the sequels and everything. I couldn't watch it. It was so horrible. Everything about that movie was just, I don't know, off-putting. It was just such a bad like representation of what like high schoolers act like in general. I don't know. It was just so bad.
That's a hot take. I was beyond the High School Musical generation, so I agree. I can look back and go, that was bad. But it was like the #1 selling DVD when it came out and was intensely popular.
Okay, so I can like
that
explain.
Is quite the hot take.
Yeah, I know. I can explain why I really don't like it. It's not like anything about, I mean, of course it doesn't really have not much like, I mean, it's not really about the representation or anything for me. It's more about like the things like, in the sequel, I listened to a song that's like, gotta go my own way, and it's all like, I've got to move on and be who I am, and like, I hope you understand, and no, don't leave me, and all of that. And it's like, you'd think she's like, the girl who's singing that is probably moving to like a different state or like a different school or something. No, she's quitting a job. They're literally gonna see each other at school every day. So it's just so dramatized and so like, honestly, just vomit-inducing for me. I don't know. It's just,
I know people like that.
High schoolers don't act like that. And yeah, I guess it's just me. I don't like that. I do not like that. I hate that kind of stuff.
Mila, let's not discount how dramatic high schoolers can be, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, but not... Okay, fine. But
just because you've never broken out into song about something you're dealing with.
Are you sure I haven't broken out into song anytime? How can you be sure I haven't?
I see you at school and you haven't, you know what? You're right. And I hope that when you do break out in a song, it's when I can see it happen.
And film it. Yeah.
God.
And then I can show it to you years down the line and say, see, you were just like High School Musical.
I mean, it's spontaneous.
Could you
so
imagine that 10 years after you do something, you just get an email of you breaking out into song in the middle of a high school hallway? I cannot imagine how that would feel.
Yeah, because most people don't break out into song in the middle of high school hallways.
Yeah, I think I'd live too far away from a cliff to just walk off it if someone did that to me.
Jump off the roof. Okay, you know what? Moving on from that.
Following kind of like the sequels that Maya was talking about in High School Musical, what are your opinions on sequels? Do you think that they're just money makers? Like, for example, like Legend of Korra?
Or Frozen 2, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, High School Musical and its sequels were just in general bad, so I'm not going to talk about those, but I really like Legend of Korra. It put like a new spin. It wasn't really using the same characters. It had a new spin. Maybe it didn't do the original characters very well, but the new characters were awesome, maybe even better than some of the originals, and I really liked it more than Atla, actually. Frozen 2, on the other hand.
Oh boy, that's a hot take.
That's a really hot take.
Yes, it's a very, very hot take. I've argued with people over this a lot. But yeah, for Frozen 2 and other sequels like that, I mean, I don't think they're that much worse. They're pretty much in the same league, but they're definitely money grabbers. I can't think of one right now, but I know there was one, I can't remember what, that was really, really bad. Like, it was literally just a money grabber. They don't even it's like they don't even try because they know it's gonna, if the first one did really well, this one is going to do really well as well. Yeah, I can't remember what it was right now. You guys might know. Like, it was I think it was a Disney movie. I mean, just in general, I don't necessarily watch sequels. Like, I haven't watched a lot of the sequels, but...
I watch sequels generally if I like the first one. I think that if they're done well, this question might seem silly. No one would ask it if the sequel or the prequel was done well, right? They're very clearly moneymakers, but sometimes when the artist's vision is also a profitable vision, we end up with something amazing, like Better Call Saul is the prequel to Breaking Bad, and both are very good in their own right. If a sequel is bad, then we find ourselves asking, who asked for this? Why did they make this? They ruined what I loved.
Yeah, I think I remember, like, Boss Baby 2. Like I told you, I watched the animated series, so naturally I watched the sequel, and it was bad. I mean, this is also a hot take. People who like the first one like the second one, but I didn't like it. It was kind of chaotic and it seemed kind of pointless. Like, yeah, what opinion do I have that's not a hot take?
No, that's the spiciest take I've ever heard. Boss Baby 2 is worse than Boss Baby 1.
Why?
No, I have no idea. I've never seen either of them.
Oh, I see how it is.
I just think it's funny. I think it's funny you think you might offend someone with that opinion. If you'd like to, I'm offended.
I don't know a single person who is remotely passionate about Boss Baby, so I think you got this on lock. I don't know, maybe there's a community that I don't know about.
I just looked at the comments underneath the trailer or something, and it seems like everyone loved the movie. Everyone who watched it.
I haven't seen it, and I intend to watch it soon, but I'm told that the live-action Paddington Bear movie is great, and the sequel to it is even better.
I watched Paddington, but not the sequel. Yeah.
I know there's kind of similar to sequels, but there's also remakes. And this is a kind of interesting topic. So, like, for example, there's this one Chinese drama that I really enjoyed watching, and they recently made a Korean version of it, and they got their time cut in half, so they had to rush essentially everything, and they made everything super dramatic, changed a lot of the characters, and called it a remake to kind of piggyback off of the Chinese version's success. And there are people who defend it, saying that you have to consider it as a different thing. Would you argue in agreement with them, or would you argue that because it's marketed as a remake specifically to piggyback off the original, then you can't really consider it different?
I'm going to mention the two remakes I know, and one of them is Indian, so I've never heard of it. It's from my language. So there was one in a different Indian language that was nearby, and they remade it, and it was literally the exact same thing, like full on same songs, just with like slightly different lyrics so they'd rhyme. Same story, same types of characters, basically the exact same thing, just in a different language and with different actors. That's one side of it. And the other side is like you said, like Paulina said, making it too different. So are we, like, I don't know what people expect from remakes. Do they expect it to be similar, or do they expect it to be different? And then the other remake I know is the Last Airbender movie, which we're just not talking about.
I think
If we...
Oh yeah,
I'm sorry,
go ahead.
Oh, okay, I'll go. If we want to talk about remakes, at least in my mind, the ideal time for a remake is there is a story that is out there that we know it works, but the portrayal we have of it right now is outdated. Therefore, we need a remake, right? Mm-hmm. Or obviously for languages and cultures and stuff, that's different. But I think remakes work best when it's particularly for an antiquated story that is good, that we want to polish. Because that's how you reinvigorate a franchise or a story, right? Is making it more contemporary.
Right. You'd have to decide whether the current iteration of that thing is still good, even now. And for example, the Disney animated movies that they've remade into live actions, the live actions have been fine, but not better than their animated counterparts. But they are, like, Disney's rolling in money with them, so why wouldn't they keep producing them?
The other issue on, like, remakes is, do you think that they should always be compared to the original or not?
Yes. They have to be.
And about maybe sequels as well. Compared to the original or no?
Yes. You can't people. How can you possibly watch Boss Baby 2 and not think, oh my god, Boss Baby 1 was an Oscar winner here compared to Boss Baby 2?
Yeah. That happened a lot with The Promised Neverland Season 2, where everyone thought it was terrible because the first season was so good. So I think I do kind of stray to the other side, where there has to be some amount of like independence towards it, or at least that the remade show should not detract from the original.
Yeah.
But I think the original can detract from the remake. That's
true. I mean, yeah, in the case of like The Legend of Korra, which isn't really a remake, but it's like a sequel, people kept comparing it. It's this is kind of a bit relevant to like the remakes, but like people kept comparing it, and like, I don't know, I just think it should be considered as completely separate. Well, not completely separate, but like mostly separate. Because a lot of people compared it to the original and were mad that it wasn't as good or that it messed up the character somewhat. But if you see it as like an individual show, it's great.
I agree. I think Legend of Korra would be a great show if it wasn't following Avatar: The Last Airbender. Because that show just set the standards really high.
Yeah, definitely.
And now people aren't going to watch it because they watched the original and don't want this to quote-unquote mess that up.
And I personally feel like the portrayal of the main characters from ATLA was kind of different in Legend of Korra, which sequels sometimes can't escape. And, but that might make it seem worse when compared to the original.
Also, like, this is kind of a minor point, but in Legend of Korra, we also have to take into consideration that a lot of the characters that everyone loved from Avatar: Last Airbender are dead.
Well, one of them isn't. Actually, two of them are.
Yeah, two of them
a lot of them are.
No, three.
Actually.
Three of them, yeah.
More than half.
Three of them are
But,
dead
like,
out of 5.
If you think about...
No, 4 out of 5 aren't dead.
Wait, no, Sokka...
No,
No,
3
two
out
of
of 5
them
aren't dead.
are.
Yeah, Aang and Sokka are dead.
Yeah, but I think, like, most people... It makes them sad to see the character so old and passed away and, like...
It made me sad
You know?
for, like, the first episode, and then I forgot about them.
Really?
I could speak for hours with you about this topic.
We
But
have,
I don't
like...
think we should.
Yeah, we only have a little
We have
time
9
left,
minutes, so dude, let's do one more question and wrap it up.
So this will be our ending question. If you could only watch one show or movie for the rest of your life, what would it be and why?
Okay, can I go? Because
Yeah.
I think this is fun. So For me, I generally like romance anime, so that definitely puts me in a bubble. It has to be something that has rewatch value, has some sort of plot, but is still comforting. And I think that leaves you with a few shows. One of them is Blend S, which is the cheesiest slice of life I think you will ever get. Number 2, I think, is Bunny Girl Senpai, because I think it works very well as a drama and also very well as a comfort show. And I think the final one may be Working, which is an old slice of life. I think those both work really well for rewatch value.
I also
Okay.
thought.
Oh, yeah, go
sorry. Mila, you can go ahead.
Okay, well, mine is quick, because I like I said, I don't watch many shows. I'm tempted to say the Boss Baby series, but then again, I think I'd be mad at my younger self if I got older. So yeah, probably I'll just go with Atla, because adults seem to enjoy that as well. Or not Atla, The Legend of Korra, because I like that one more.
All right, so I thought a lot about this because I would be doomed to watch this for the rest of my life. And I came up with 2 answers. The first one was Saturday Night Live, because there's over 45 seasons and it's a continuing show.
That's cheating.
So
That's
I always
cheating.
have something to watch. Oh, you're gonna
Yeah,
like
I
the other
we do
answer.
not consider that a show.
That's cheating. It has to
a
be.
show. We can't move the goalposts here.
We just did.
And
We
here's
have this
the
No,
podcast.
okay, so then my show is the BBC. That's what I want. I want the BBC.
That's a channel. That's a channel.
Okay, I want
choose a
BBC's
TV
Hard
show.
Talk. I want BBC's Hard Talk or BBC 3 documentaries.
This is
All right, the
good.
other answer, if I had to watch the rest of my life, I want something that is like really, really long-winded and continuing. And I looked it up. One Piece has 980 episodes at the moment. So I have tons of One Piece to watch, and it's still going on even now. So for the rest of my life, I could probably watch that and get plenty of variety.
I mean,
I
if
don't-
you want something long and continuous, you could watch Doctor Who.
Yeah, but that show doesn't appeal to me.
I'm
I see.
convinced that One Piece fans are clinically insane. I don't know how they have that much patience to watch through that.
When I first watched One Piece and got into it, it was because I moved to Japan, and I called the service to get internet, and they said they'd come out and do the internet in a month. So I had no internet at my apartment for a month when I first got there. And so a friend of mine gave me, at the time, like 500 episodes of One Piece.
Oh.
That's what I did when I got home from school, is I watched One Piece.
We need to talk more about Japan because my life, there is a possibility that my life will end up in Japan at some point in the near future.
Yeah, cool. I go back.
Yeah.
I go back once a year. Ever since I left, I lived there for 3 years.
Yeah.
I
Okay,
go
guys,
back
do
once a
this
year.
off this podcast.
No, yeah, I was saying separately, not right now.
Okay, great.
Alright, well, that is all the time that we have for today. Thank you for listening, and a huge thank you to our interviewees for spending time to come and participate in our wonderful podcast.
With Mr.
Thank you for
Sam,
having us on. This was
adult
fun.
life with adult stuff to do and stuff.
I have lots of Bluey to watch.
Yeah, that
Yes, have fun with that.
So
Alright.
goodbye, everyone.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. See ya.
Bye.
We'd like to thank our guest speakers, Po'boy and Mr. Sam, as well as Polly for editing and recording, Cheryl for performing the music that you are hearing right now, and Mila for scriptwriting and general moral support. We'd also like to thank our English teacher for inspiring us to create this podcast. Last but not least, we'd like to thank our dedicated listeners for supporting us. See you in the next episode.